Virginia is known for its beautiful mountains and historic, quiet towns. But beneath that peaceful surface hides a deeply unsettling reality. Today, we're covering the 10 most disturbing and mysterious disappearances in Virginia history. These cases defy logic, shatter families, and fuel nightmares. If you love deep dives into the unexplained, please take a second to hit that subscribe button and give hype points. Now, turn down the lights and let's get into it. A warning before we start. This case involves the death of a very young child. We are going to discuss it with the gravity it deserves, and we are not going to dwell on the worst details. But you should know going in that this is the hardest case in this series, because of how long the truth was hidden, and because of how many people loved this little boy and were lied to about whether he was even still alive. On the morning of January 31st, 2022, a father in Hampton, Virginia called 911 in apparent panic to report that his 4-year-old son had vanished from inside their home overnight. A massive search exploded across the city, helicopters in the air, K-9 units sweeping the neighborhood, hundreds of volunteers walking the freezing streets calling the boy's name, donations and prayer chains in a community holding its collective breath. But here's the part that makes this case different from every other missing child case you have ever heard. While that entire city was sprinting through the freezing cold, searching for a toddler in a coat, the boy they were looking for had already been dead for 7 months, and the man on the phone with 911 knew it. This is the case of Cody Bigsby, and it is one of the coldest, most calculated cover-ups in modern Virginia history. Let me set the scene. It's a bitterly cold Monday morning, late January. Hampton sits on the Virginia coast, a busy, mid-sized city next to the water, full of tightly packed neighborhoods, apartment complexes, families, churches, and military households. The wind off the bay in January cuts straight through a jacket. We are talking about the kind of morning where you scrape ice off your windshield and your fingers go numb in 20 seconds. A morning where every adult in town knows instinctively that a small child outside without proper winter clothing has minutes, not hours, before something terrible happens. That's the morning the 911 call comes in. The caller is Cody Bigsby. He is the full-time custodial father of 4 young children, including baby twins. And on the phone, he sounds like a man having the worst morning of his life. He tells the dispatcher that his son, Cody, listed in the call as 4 years old, is missing from inside the home. He says he was downstairs cooking breakfast for the twins, went back upstairs to grab a coat, and discovered Cody was gone from his bed. He points to an unlocked front door. He mentions a sliding glass door at the back of the home that he says is broken. The implication is clear. Somehow, a tiny toddler woke up in the middle of the night, opened a door, and wandered out into one of the coldest mornings of the year. Hampton police don't waste a second. They cannot. When a 4-year-old is missing in sub-freezing weather, every minute multiplies the chances of him being found dead from exposure alone. The response is immediate and enormous. Officers flood the neighborhood, helicopters are scrambled, K-9 units arrive with handlers, cadaver dogs are eventually brought in, hundreds of community volunteers show up to grid search the streets, the playgrounds, the wooded edges of the area, and the nearby beach. The whole city throws everything it has into looking for one small boy. And then, within about 24 hours, the entire investigation does something strange. It stops being a missing person case. It becomes something else entirely. Because while the search is roaring across the neighborhood, detectives quietly do what experienced investigators always do in cases like this. They separate the children inside the home. They sit down with Cody's siblings. And they ask the question every parent would assume has an obvious answer. "Hey, when did you last see your brother?" The kids answer, and the floor falls out of the entire case. The siblings tell investigators that they have not seen Cody that morning. They have not seen him the day before. They have not seen him the week before. They have not seen him in months. Some of them tell police they don't believe they have seen their brother since the previous summer. Stop, breathe, let that one land. The father's on the phone telling 911 he last saw Cody alive in his bed around 2 in the morning. The other kids in the same house are telling investigators their brother has been gone since around summertime. That is the moment this entire case stops being about finding a wandering toddler in the cold and starts being about figuring out exactly how long a father has been hiding the death of his own son. Now let's tear into the logic of Corey Bigsby's story piece by piece, because once you start applying common sense, his version of events doesn't survive a single round of questioning. Let's start with the physics of a 4-year-old. Corey's story requires you to believe that a small toddler woke up in the middle of the night in a heated bedroom, decided he wanted to go outside, climbed out of bed, opened a door, front or back, and wandered off into the freezing dark, alone, without a coat. Hold on. Let's actually think about what a 4-year-old can do. A child that age might unlock a deadbolt if it's at his height. He might wander into a yard. He might toddle a block. But 4-year-olds don't have the stamina or the navigational skills to vanish into thin air. When toddlers wander off, they are almost always found within hours, usually within blocks, often spotted by a neighbor, or sniffed out by a search dog before they get a quarter-mile away. Toddlers leave a trail. They cry. They sit down. They get cold. They get tired. They get noticed. So the Hampton PD did what any competent department would do. They brought in tracking dogs. They gave the dogs Cody's jacket and pillowcase. The dogs were specifically trained to follow the scent of a missing child from the point they were last seen. The dogs did their job. They found nothing. There was no scent trail of a child leaving the apartment that morning. None, because no child had left the apartment that morning. Then, they brought in a cadaver dog to sweep the property. That dog also found nothing, which told investigators something incredibly specific. Whatever happened to Cody did not happen on that property on the morning of January 31st. The scene was clean of him, in both directions. Now let's talk about the broken sliding door. Corey blamed an unlocked front door and a broken lock on a sliding glass door for his son's supposed exit. The Hampton police did the simple, boring, obvious detective work. They asked the property management of the apartment complex to pull their maintenance records. Had Corey Bigsby ever filed a request to have that broken sliding door lock repaired, ever in the entire time he had lived there? The answer was no. Never. Not one work order, not one complaint. The broken lock, through which a toddler had supposedly escaped, didn't exist in any maintenance record in the building. A father who claimed his back door couldn't lock had somehow lived with that broken door for an unknown amount of time without ever asking for it to be fixed. Why? Because there was no broken lock. It was a prop he invented in the moments before he made the 911 call. But the most devastating evidence is the one that takes you straight into the 7-month ghost period. When investigators eventually seized Corey's cell phone, the phone of a doting father, the phone of a man who claimed to be raising 4 young children single-handedly, they went looking for the kind of digital footprint every modern parent leaves. Photos, videos, birthday clips, the little 3-second clips of a kid eating spaghetti, the kind of thing every phone is overflowing with. They found a wall, a clean break. There were no original photographs of Cody taken anywhere on that phone after June of 2021. Not a single one. The most photographed creatures in the modern world are toddlers, and for over 7 months, this toddler had been deleted from his own father's camera roll. Now, apply that to the timeline. The siblings said they hadn't seen Cody since the summer. The phone has no photos of Cody after June. The dogs found no scent of Cody leaving the apartment. The cadaver dog found nothing on the property. The broken lock was a lie. The pieces all stack into one ugly, undeniable picture. Cody Bigsby had been dead since the summer of 2021. He had been missing, actually missing, dead missing, for roughly 7 months before his father finally pretended to discover he was gone. The investigators worked the case meticulously. While Corey remained in custody on related neglect charges, prosecutors built their no-body homicide case from scratch. They had the dog evidence, they had the digital silence, they had the lie about the lock, they had the siblings' testimony. And then, while in jail awaiting trial, Corey made the choice that closed the case. He wrote out a handwritten confession that described the events of June 18th, 2021 in chilling, hyper-specific detail. He confessed to inflicting fatal injuries on his son in the kitchen of their home that day. He confessed to attempting to revive the boy. He confessed to placing the body in his truck, driving to a wooded patch off Garrett A. Morgan Boulevard, and burying him there. He even described specific items he had supposedly buried with the boy and a piece of the child's bicycle he had left as a marker near the grave. The FBI and Hampton police went to that location. They brought in heavy equipment. They dug. They searched. They processed the dirt for any sign of human remains. They found nothing. The location existed. The site existed. But Cody was not there. Whether the confession was partially fabricated, whether Corey moved the body again later, whether the markers had been disturbed by years of weather, investigators don't know to this day. On March 12, 2024, a jury heard the entire case. They deliberated for just 2 hours. They came back with a guilty verdict on second-degree murder and concealing a dead body. In June of 2024, on the exact 3-year anniversary of the day he killed his son, Corey Bigsby was sentenced to the maximum allowable penalty, 45 years in prison. He still faces a separate trial on dozens of counts of child abuse involving his other children, which carries the potential for an additional 150 years on top. In December of 2025, the Virginia Court of Appeals heard his appeal, which argued, among other things, that the lack of a body meant the state hadn't really proven a murder. A 3-judge panel dismantled every one of his arguments and upheld the conviction. Cody's mother, Dina Abdul Karim, addressed the court at sentencing. She had not been the custodial parent. She had trusted the wrong person with her son. She stood in front of a courtroom and used the word sociopath about the father of her children and prayed that her little boy's memory would haunt that man for the rest of his life. But here's the lingering wound this case will never fully heal. Cody's body has never been found. The community that mobilized in the freezing cold of January 31st, 2022, was searching for a child who had not been alive for over half a year. They were searching for a ghost, and the man who knew the truth had been walking past their search lines for months. A 4-year-old little boy was buried somewhere in the Virginia woods in the summer of 2021. The world wasn't told to start looking for him until winter, and somewhere out there, under the trees and the dirt and the silence, he is still waiting to come home. Think about the people who text you every day. Your mom, your best friend, your partner. You know their voice through a screen better than most strangers know their own faces. You can tell when something is off about a single message. The way they use punctuation, the little phrases they always use, the typos they always make. Now, imagine getting those messages day after day, week after week, and not knowing that the person you love is already dead, and the man who killed her is the one tapping out every word. That is what happened to the family and friends of Bethany Decker. For weeks after she vanished, they believed she was alive. They were texting a ghost. And the worst part? The killer was so confident he'd never get caught that he sat in her apartment, used her phone, and built a fake life on top of her real one. This is one of the most chilling no-body cases in Virginia history, and it almost got away clean. Let me set the scene. It's January 2011. Ashburn, Virginia, dead of winter. Bare trees, freezing rain, gray skies. Ashburn isn't some isolated backwater. It's a fast-growing, affluent suburb about 40 miles outside of Washington, D.C., the kind of place packed with modern apartment complexes, tech workers, young military families. From the outside, every door looks like middle-class normal. Granite countertops, leased SUVs in the parking lot, holiday lights still up 2 weeks after Christmas. But behind one of those doors, in one specific apartment, a 21-year-old woman is living through a private nightmare. Her name is Bethany Decker. Bethany is the kind of young woman who is doing everything right and being punished for it anyway. She's a student at George Mason University, fighting through her coursework. She's already a mother to a 1-year-old son. She is 5 months pregnant with her second child. She works shifts at a local restaurant to bring in money. By every meaningful measure, she is responsible, hardworking, and driven. She's a kid trying to be a grown-up faster than any 21-year-old should have to. But her life is also enormously complicated. Her husband, an active-duty soldier, is currently deployed to Afghanistan, thousands of miles away in a combat zone. And while he's gone, Bethany is living in their apartment with a new boyfriend, a man named Ronald Roldan. Roldan is the kind of presence that her friends had quietly grown afraid of. Controlling, volatile, the type of guy who needed to know where she was at all times, who didn't like her working, didn't like her independence, didn't like the idea of her getting her own paycheck. Her college roommates would later say that Bethany knew she was in a bad spot. She knew she was trapped. She just didn't know how to get out. That tension is the powder keg of this whole story. And on the afternoon of January 29th, 2011, somebody lit the fuse. Bethany comes home to the apartment. She tells Roldan she's picked up an extra shift at the restaurant. That's it. That's the trigger. A pregnant 21-year-old college student telling her boyfriend she wants to work a few more hours, bring in a little more money, build a little more security for her kids. To any normal partner, that's fantastic news. To Ronald Roldan, that's an act of war. The argument explodes in the living room. According to what Roldan would eventually admit, years later, under the pressure of a guilty plea, he physically pushed Bethany during that fight. She fell. The side of her head struck the sharp edge of a windowsill. And she died there, in her own apartment, 5 months pregnant, with her toddler somewhere in the same building. Now, here is the first terrible logic gap of this case. If you are a person who has just been involved in an accidental death, and we are accepting his version for the sake of argument, what do? You call 911. Even if you're scared, even if you think nobody will believe you, you call. Because that is the only path that has any chance of ending without a murder charge. But Roldan didn't make that call. He told investigators years later that he believed the police would never believe him. So instead, he made a calculated decision. He walked into the kitchen. He grabbed a large plastic Christmas tree disposal bag, the kind that's everywhere in suburban kitchens in late January because everybody's tossing out their dried-out trees. He placed his pregnant girlfriend into the bag. He taped it shut. He picked it up. And he carried her out of the apartment. He didn't drive her into the woods. He didn't haul her to a remote field. He went to the trash compactor for the apartment complex. He dropped the bag inside. And then, in the most cold-blooded touch of the whole disposal, he piled regular kitchen trash bags on top of her, so that to any passing neighbor or sanitation worker, it looked like one more pile of post-holiday garbage. Now, this is where it gets strange, and stay with me, because the cold logic of what he did is the entire reason this case went unsolved for a decade. A trash compactor in a modern Northern Virginia apartment complex is essentially a one-way door to oblivion. The compactor crushes everything inside it. The contents get hauled out to a landfill within days. Once at the landfill, you're talking about thousands of tons of waste, biological, chemical, industrial, being piled on top of any single bag every single hour. Within weeks, anything that went into that compactor is gone. Not hidden, not buried somewhere a search team could find with a cadaver dog. Just gone. Lost and unrecoverable within the massive scale of a municipal waste facility. Roldan, accidentally or intentionally, had stumbled onto one of the only disposal methods in modern America where there's essentially no forensic trail, no soil to test, no woods to scour, no water to drag. The body of his pregnant girlfriend was on a literal conveyor belt to disappearance. But that's only half the cover-up, because here's the thing. A 21-year-old college student with a baby, a job, classes, friends, and a deployed husband doesn't just vanish without people noticing. Her phone is going to start ringing within hours. Her texts are going to start piling up. Her restaurant manager is going to ask where she is, her professors, her family. So Roldan went to work on her digital life. He picked up Bethany's phone. He logged into her accounts. And for the next several weeks, he carefully, deliberately performed the role of Bethany Decker. He posted updates. He sent texts. He called her workplace using her phone to manage her schedule and buy himself time. To anyone scrolling through their feed or glancing at a text, it looked like Bethany was alive, just maybe distant, maybe stressed, maybe pulling away. But the people who actually knew her, the people who had been getting her real messages for years, started noticing things. Let's look at the facts. Bethany had a specific way she texted, a specific tone, specific words she used, specific shorthand, specific grammar, and the messages coming through suddenly didn't sound like her. The phrasing was wrong. The vibe was wrong. Friends would later say they remember reading texts in those weeks and feeling something was off, even though they couldn't have explained why at the time. That's because they weren't reading Bethany's voice. They were reading a man's impersonation of her voice. Roldan was a grown adult man pretending to be a pregnant 21-year-old college girl, and he was doing it badly. Then came the day everything caught up with him. In mid-February, Bethany's husband flew home from Afghanistan on leave. A soldier who has been counting the days down to seeing his pregnant wife again. He came home, and there was no wife. There was no Bethany. Her family, who had been quietly worrying for weeks but trying to convince themselves nothing was wrong, finally connected the dots. Nobody had actually heard her voice. Not a phone call, not a video chat, not a hug. Just text messages that didn't sound right. They went to the apartment. Bethany was gone. But her car was sitting right there in the parking lot, completely undisturbed, untouched for weeks. On February 19th, she was officially reported missing. And now, we can really tear into the logic of the early investigation. Roldan's first explanation, of course, was that maybe Bethany had just walked away, wanted to clear her head, took off to figure things out. Let's look at that for half a second. A 21-year-old woman who is 5 months pregnant with a toddler at home and a husband flying back from a combat zone just decides to vanish without taking her car, without touching her bank account, without packing a bag, without saying goodbye to her 1-year-old son, without going to the hospital for any of her prenatal appointments. Pregnant women in their second trimester do not ghost. They go to the doctor. They eat constantly. They are tracked by an entire medical system. Bethany dropped off all of those systems simultaneously the same day she vanished from her own apartment. That's not a runaway. That's a victim. And then there's the boyfriend's behavior. Hold on a second. Just think about it. If you are an innocent man and the woman you love disappears from the apartment you both share, you call the police. Immediately. You don't sit in that apartment for weeks. You don't use her phone to text her friends in her workplace. You don't carry on a pantomime of her life while her car gathers a layer of dust outside. Roldan didn't behave like a worried partner. He behaved like a cleanup crew. With the absence of a body, the absolute, irretrievable absence of a body, was a wall the prosecutors couldn't get past. Without remains, without forensic evidence of a murder scene, without a crime location, you cannot file a charge. And so for nearly a decade, Ronald Roldan walked until he couldn't help himself. Roldan moved to North Carolina. And in North Carolina, he did exactly what Loudoun County investigators had quietly feared he would do. He brutally attacked another woman. He was arrested for that assault. And as he sat in a North Carolina jail cell, investigators back in Virginia recognized something critical. This wasn't a one-time accident. This was a pattern. This was a man with an established history of severe violence against intimate partners. In November of 2020, Loudoun County issued an abduction warrant and extradited him back to Virginia. The case finally cracked open in November of 2022, when Roldan, facing the threat of a full circumstantial trial, pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. That's when he confessed to Detective Mark Bush. The windowsill, the Christmas tree bag, the trash compactor, every cold, calculated step. On February 21st, 2023, in a Leesburg courtroom, Ronald Roldan was sentenced. The judge handed down a 40-year sentence, but under the terms of the plea deal, all but 12.5 years was suspended. 12.5 active years for the death of a pregnant 21-year-old and the unborn child she was carrying. When that sentence is up, Roldan will be deported to his native Bolivia. And Bethany? Bethany has never been found. She was inside that Christmas tree bag when it went into the compactor, and she was somewhere in a Northern Virginia landfill within days. She is, by every realistic forensic assessment, irretrievable. He took her life. He took her voice. He spent weeks pretending to be her on her own phone. And in the end, when the plea was signed and the sentence was handed down and the cameras were rolling outside the courthouse, the one thing he absolutely refused to give back, The one thing that could have brought any closure at all was the one piece of information only he knows: where she is. A young, pregnant mother vanished from her own apartment. Her killer stole her voice to trick the people who loved her, and to this day, he holds the final secret she ever became. Picture this. It's just after dawn on a cool April morning in 1988. A park ranger is making his usual loop along a quiet, scenic stretch of road in Tidewater, Virginia. He pulls into a riverside overlook, expecting to find nothing more than a few empty parking spaces and a beautiful view of the water. But there, sitting alone in the middle of the lot, is a red Toyota Celica with its driver's side door hanging wide open. The keys are sitting on the center console. The watch and glasses of the young man who owns this car are still inside, and in the back seat, neatly piled, almost like someone arranged them, is nearly all the clothing the two people in this car were wearing the night before: underwear, pants, everything. But the two people themselves, gone, no struggle, no blood, no footprints, just a car with its door open, an empty river view, and the silence of a Virginia morning. This is the disappearance of Keith Call and Cassandra Haley. And what happened to them on that dark stretch of highway is one of the most chilling mysteries in American crime. Let me set the stage properly, because you have to understand the road. The Colonial Parkway is one of the most beautiful drives on the East Coast, a 23-mile scenic byway run by the National Park Service that ties together three historic sites: Jamestown, Williamsburg, and Yorktown. By day, it is postcard Virginia. Old brick paving, towering trees, glimpses of the York River shimmering on one side, the James River on the other. Tourists pull over to take pictures of the water. Bald eagles nest in the woods. It feels safe, it feels protected. But at night, the Colonial Parkway becomes something else entirely. There are no streetlights. None. The National Park Service preserved the road as a historic corridor, which means the same dark, winding road the colonists rode hasn't been modernized with the kind of yellow sodium glare you'd find on a regular Virginia highway. The trees swallow what little moonlight there is. The pull-offs along the water are completely isolated, with the nearest help often miles away. By the late 1980s, the parkway had become a notorious lover's lane for students from the nearby colleges. Couples would drive out, park at the overlooks, talk for hours, kiss, watch the river. It felt private. It felt safe. It was the opposite. And in the spring of 1988, that road had already become a hunting ground. Now, meet our victims. Richard Keith Call was 20 years old, a student at Christopher Newport College. By all accounts, a normal, friendly young guy. He had a long-term girlfriend that he had recently put on a brief 2-week pause to figure some stuff out. And during that pause, he asked an 18-year-old girl named Cassandra Haley, also a student at Christopher Newport, out on what was effectively a casual first date. Cassandra was just a freshman, cautious by nature, quiet, the kind of young woman who said yes to a movie and a college party on a Saturday night, because that sounded fun and safe and ordinary. On the evening of April 9th, 1988, Keith picks Cassandra up in his red Toyota Celica. They go to a movie. Then they head to a college party at the University Square apartments over in Newport News. Witnesses at the party remember seeing them having a good time, laughing, hanging out, behaving exactly like two college students on a first date. Around 1:30 in the morning, they leave the party together. Keith is supposed to drop Cassandra off at her home. They never get there. The next morning, that park ranger pulls into the York River overlook on the Colonial Parkway. And there's the red Celica, sitting in the lot, driver's side door hanging open. Now, this is where every single detail starts contradicting every other detail, and the case stops making any sense at all. The keys are sitting on the center console, not in the ignition, not in a pocket, not in the grass, just sitting there. Inside the car, in plain view, Keith's watch and his glasses, two items a 20-year-old man does not voluntarily leave behind, especially the glasses if he actually needs them to see. But then the ranger looks in the back seat, and the back seat holds the detail that has haunted investigators for nearly 4 decades. Piled inside the vehicle is nearly all of the clothing that Keith and Cassandra had been wearing the night before. Cassandra's underwear, Keith's pants, the kind of clothing that does not get removed casually. 2 college students in their early 20s have somehow vanished from this car, leaving behind their keys, their watch, their glasses, and most of what they were wearing. The car is empty. The lot is empty. Cassandra and Keith are gone. Okay, let's start tearing apart the theories one by one, because the initial police instinct was to find the easiest explanation possible. The first idea floated was skinny dipping. 2 young people on a first date, alcohol from the party in their system, parked at a romantic overlook above a river, decide to strip down and take a swim. End of story. Hold on a second. Let's actually look at that. It's early April in Tidewater, Virginia. The night air temperature is in the 40s. The York River in early April is brutally cold. We're talking water that hovers in the 50s, the kind of cold that punches the breath out of a grown adult within seconds of getting in. And the overlook isn't a gentle waiting beach. It's a steep, rocky drop with the river running below. Now think about Cassandra, a cautious 18-year-old freshman on her very first date with a guy she barely knows. Are we really meant to believe she stripped naked, climbed down a freezing embankment, jumped into pitch-black 50-degree water, and never came back? With her boyfriend's keys and watch sitting on the dashboard, just waiting for them to climb back into the car? The skinny dipping theory doesn't survive 5 minutes of common sense, so if they didn't leave that car voluntarily, somebody made them leave it. And that brings us to the second and far more terrifying theory. Let's think about the mechanics. Keith and Cassandra are sitting in a parked car at a dark overlook. The keys are in the ignition. The engine is right there. The road is right there. If a random stranger comes walking up to their car, what does Keith do? He drives away. He throws the car into reverse. He punches the gas. He peels out of that overlook and back onto the parkway. End of story. There is no reason on earth a 20-year-old guy lets a creep approach his car at 1 a.m. when he has a working vehicle and a clear escape route. Unless the person walking up to that car was somebody you don't run from. This is where the case becomes truly disturbing. Throughout the late 1980s, reports started surfacing along this exact stretch of road in the surrounding peninsula. Couples on dark roads were being approached by a man driving a pickup truck with what looked like waterman's gear in the back. The man would pull in behind them, sometimes flash a light, and confront them in a way that made it clear he was supposed to have authority. He was posing as law enforcement. He was posing as a park ranger. Now think about how that changes everything. If you're sitting in your car at a Colonial Parkway overlook and a guy walks up flashing what looks like a badge or talking like a ranger telling you you're not supposed to be parked here, you don't punch the gas and run. That is a felony. You roll the window down, you comply, you believe him. By the time you realize that the badge isn't real or that the ranger isn't a ranger, you are already out of the car on a dark riverbank and there is nobody coming to help you. That theory explains the keys on the console. It explains the watch and glasses left behind. It explains the lack of any struggle inside the car. They didn't fight because they didn't know they were in danger until it was too late. But here's the next logic gap. If they were attacked and forced out of the car, why were their clothes piled in the back seat? You don't take a couple's clothes off and stack them neatly to hide a body. The clothing wasn't a cleanup move. It was, almost certainly, a staging move. Somebody wanted that car to look a certain way when it was discovered, wanted to humiliate the victims, or wanted to make it look like they had wandered off voluntarily for something romantic. It was a message. And then the biggest logic gap of all. If they were killed right there on the riverbank, in a tourist area patrolled by park rangers just yards from a parking lot, where is the evidence? No blood at the overlook, no drag marks, no torn clothing in the brush, no personal items in the trees. How do 2 adults disappear from one of the most regularly trafficked scenic byways in Virginia without leaving a single physical trace behind? The answer is the worst part of this case. Whoever took Keith and Cassandra didn't kill them at the overlook. He took them somewhere else, probably by water, probably in a boat, probably to a place where the river does the disposal work for you and there's nothing left for a search team to find. And that brings us to the larger horror sitting underneath this story. Keith and Cassandra were not the only ones. Their disappearance was part of a string of attacks now known to history as the Colonial Parkway Murders, a series of crimes spanning 1986 through 1989, almost all of them targeting young couples in cars parked along dark stretches of road in this exact part of Tidewater, Virginia. Kathleen Thomas and Rebecca Dowski, David Nobling and Robin Edwards, Anna Maria Phelps and Daniel Lauer, Teresa Howell. Some were shot, some were strangled, some were left in their vehicles. Some, like Keith and Cassandra, simply vanished. For decades, the FBI, the Virginia State Police, and the National Park Service chased shadows. The investigations crossed jurisdictions. Evidence sat in storage. Theories came and went. There was even, infamously, an early suspect in the Call and Haley case named Alan Wade Wilmer Sr., a local commercial fisherman, a waterman, who drove a blue Dodge Ram pickup with the vanity plate EM-RAW and who had unrestricted access to the back roads, private docks, and deep coastal waters of the peninsula. Just 4 days after Keith and Cassandra disappeared, FBI agents watched Wilmer frantically cleaning and painting his truck. They executed a search warrant, they found weapons, they found restraints, and then they administered a polygraph test. Wilmer passed it. Relying on the technology of the day, the FBI cleared him. They walked away, and the killer was free to keep operating. Wilmer died in 2017. He was 63 years old. But here's the update that rewrote the entire case. In January of 2024, the Virginia State Police and the FBI held a press conference. Using modern DNA testing on evidence that had been preserved for decades, they definitively identified Alan Wade Wilmer Sr. as the killer of David Nobling and Robin Edwards from 1987. They also identified him as the killer of Teresa Howell from 1989. The man who had passed a polygraph in 1988 was, decades later, conclusively proven to be a serial killer who had been operating along this exact corridor. And Keith and Cassandra? They are widely believed to be his victims too. Investigators have publicly named him as the prime suspect. But because there are no bodies, and because the trace evidence from their car has not yet yielded a DNA match, their case officially remains unsolved. The killer is dead. He cannot be tried. He cannot be sentenced. He cannot be made to answer. He took whatever he knew about Keith Call and Cassandra Haley into a grave in 2017. They went on a first date. They went to a party. They left around 1:30 in the morning in a red Toyota Celica headed home. And somewhere along that beautiful pitch-black scenic highway, they pulled over for one last look at the river. And they were never seen again. There is one detail in this case that once you hear it, you can't unsee. A few days after a 56-year-old grandmother disappeared from the dark side of a mountain in Virginia, a property owner stumbled across her abandoned van in the woods. Police walked up to the vehicle expecting maybe a flat tire, maybe a busted engine, maybe an old lady who had wandered off and gotten lost in the dark. Instead, they opened the door to a scene that told them instantly exactly what had happened in this vehicle. The rearview mirror had been violently torn from its mount. Blood was inside the cabin. Her medication was still on the seat and pressed firmly into the inside of the windshield. Smeared into the glass like a frozen photograph of pure terror were the bare footprints of a woman who had been on her back, kicking upward, fighting for her life. This is the case of Bonnie Santiago. And it's one of the most physically obvious and yet legally impossible cases on the books in the Commonwealth of Virginia. Let me set the scene first, because the geography of Carter Mountain is the entire story. Carter Mountain sits in Albemarle County, just south of Charlottesville. By day, it is one of the prettiest places in central Virginia. Carter Mountain Orchard, apple trees in rows that stretch out into the haze. Tourists driving up the winding road on weekends to pick fruit, drink cider, and take pictures of the panoramic view of the city and the valley below. It's a postcard. It's a date spot. It's where you take the kids. But at night, Carter Mountain becomes a different place entirely. The orchard closes. The tourists go home. The winding rural roads that snake up and around the mountain plunge into total, swallowing darkness. There are no streetlights. There is no cell service in pockets. The neighbors are far apart, separated by acres of wooded ridgeline, and the dirt access roads that crisscross the property carry you into corners of the mountain where you could scream and nobody would hear you. That's the version of Carter Mountain that exists at 1 in the morning on July 12, 2014. And that's the version that swallowed Bonnie K. Santiago. Let me tell you about Bonnie. She was 56 years old, a working woman, a housekeeper who cleaned homes in the Staunton and Charlottesville areas, the kind of hard, honest work where she was on her feet all day, every day, taking care of other people's lives so she could provide for her own. And her own was substantial. Bonnie was the matriarch of 7 children, 7 plus grandkids. Her youngest daughter, Gabrielle, would later say her mother was the center of the whole family wheel. Bonnie was a Sunday dinner mom, a check-in everyday mom, a grandmother whose phone never stopped ringing. She also lived with a critical medical reality that you have to lock into your memory for this case to make sense. Bonnie had a diagnosed heart condition. She required daily medication, not optional, not "I'll take it if I remember." We're talking life-sustaining heart medicine that a 56-year-old woman with cardiovascular issues needs in her body every single day, or she risks serious cardiac trouble. That medication is not something you forget on the seat of your van. It's something you grab before your phone. Now, on the evening of July 11, 2014, Bonnie was on the phone with her daughter Gabrielle. Just a normal conversation, mother and daughter chatting. Nothing in the call hinted at anything wrong. That phone call is the last independent contact Bonnie's family ever had with her. Sometime after that, Bonnie made her way up to her boyfriend's property on Carter Mountain. We know she was there. We know she made it to the residence, and then, according to him, the boyfriend, at around 1 in the morning on July 12th, a severe verbal argument broke out between them. He would tell investigators that Bonnie, furious, stormed out of the house in a fit of anger and walked off into the night. And that's it. That's the entire story he tells. End of file, end of timeline. According to him, Bonnie just walked off the property into the woods in the middle of the night in a temper, and that's the last anybody saw of her. He didn't follow her. He didn't call anybody. He didn't drive after her. The next morning, Bonnie isn't where she's supposed to be. She doesn't pick up family calls. Her phone is dead silent. She misses family obligations she would never miss. Gabrielle and the rest of the kids start to panic almost immediately because Bonnie does not ghost her family. It is, quite literally, the one thing she does not do. Then, a few days later, on a remote piece of property up on the mountain, somebody stumbles across her abandoned van. Now, this is where the case shifts from a missing persons mystery to something genuinely horrifying. Let's go through what investigators found inside that vehicle, piece by piece, because each detail builds on the last, and they all add up to the same conclusion. First, the rearview mirror. Not loose, not cracked, violently torn nearly all the way off its mount. A rearview mirror is glued and bracketed to the windshield in a way designed to survive years of sun exposure, daily wear, and casual bumps. The amount of physical force required to almost fully detach it is enormous. We're not talking about somebody bumping it with their elbow. We're talking about a body thrashing against it, or a body being slammed against it. That kind of damage tells you that a struggle, a real one, took place inside this van. Second, the blood. There was blood inside the cabin of the vehicle, and investigators strongly believed it was Bonnie's. So now we have not just a struggle, but a struggle that drew blood. Somebody was bleeding inside that van. Third, and this is the detail you cannot get out of your head once you hear it, the footprints on the windshield. Hold on. Let me explain what this actually means physically, because it's easy to skim past and miss the horror of it. To leave footprints on the inside of a windshield, your bare feet have to be pressed flat against the glass with force from inside the car. There is only one realistic position a human body can be in to do that. You have to be on your back, lying down, either across the front seats or with your head jammed against the driver's side door, and your feet are pointed up and forward against the glass, pushing. That isn't a comfortable position. Nobody does that for fun. Nobody does that because they're stretching. You do that when you are trying to push something off of you. You do that when you are trying to push something away from you. The positioning indicated a desperate physical struggle to fend off an assailant inside the cabin. Those weren't casual footprints. Those were the desperate, frantic, last-resort kicks of a 56-year-old woman fighting for her life inside her own van. And then, fourth, the items she left behind. Her eyeglasses, just sitting there, her flip-flops, sitting in the van, her cell phone, sitting in the van, and her daily heart medication, sitting in the van. Now let's apply the most basic common sense you possess to that list. If you are a 56-year-old woman who has decided, in the middle of an argument, to storm off into the night and start a new life, what do you take? You take your phone because that is your link to every single human being who might help you. You take your glasses because you can't see without them. You take your shoes because we are not talking about a sidewalk in town. We are talking about Carter Mountain, a rugged, rocky, wooded ridge with thorns and gravel and uneven terrain where you cannot make it 10 feet barefoot. And above everything else, you take your heart medication, because without it, your body literally cannot keep up its own rhythm. Bonnie left every single one of those things behind. You don't run away from your life and leave behind your eyesight, your communication, your footwear, and the pills required to keep your own heart beating. Nobody does that. Nobody. And then there's the part where the boyfriend's story just stops making any sense at all. Let's look at the facts. He says she walked off his property on foot, into the woods. End of his story. Okay. So how did her van end up parked, abandoned, in a different secluded spot on the mountain with the inside looking like the scene of a violent assault? If she walked away, she didn't drive the van. So who drove it? Who parked it? Who left the windshield smeared with the footprints of her panic? Vans do not relocate themselves. The vehicle being where it was, in the condition it was in, is by itself proof that somebody else was the last person inside it with her. There are two stories on the table here. One is the boyfriend's. She stormed off and disappeared into the night. End of story. The other is the story the van itself is telling. There was a violent struggle inside this vehicle. Somebody was bleeding, somebody was on her back kicking at the glass, the mirror was torn off, and then everything stopped. Only one of those stories matches the physical evidence. Now, in 2016, investigators got serious. Operating on targeted intelligence, they got a search warrant in nearby Augusta County. They went out to a property near Craigsville, and they completely drained a septic tank, hoping to recover Bonnie's remains. They came up with nothing. Because Bonnie's case is in the broader U.S. Route 29 corridor, an area that has been infamous for decades for predator activity, with names like Jesse Matthew, who murdered Hannah Graham and Morgan Harrington, and Richard Evanetz. Internet sleuths sometimes try to link Bonnie's disappearance to a passing serial offender. But investigators have always pushed back on that theory hard. Why? Because nothing about this case feels like a stranger crime. The violence is too localized, too intimate, too immediate. A passing predator doesn't fight a woman in her own van and then carefully relocate that van into a hidden corner of the mountain. The geography and the violence both point home. They point to somebody who knew Carter Mountain, somebody who knew Bonnie, somebody who had been with her that night. And yet, as of the 10-year anniversary in July of 2024, no arrests have ever been made in this case. Not one. The boyfriend remains the last known person to see Bonnie alive. The Albemarle County Police Department still has the file open, but the physical evidence inside that van, which feels like it should have closed this case in a week, has somehow stretched into a decade of silence. Her family hasn't stopped searching. They walk that mountain, they drag the ditches, they organize community searches, they keep her face on flyers. Through groups like the Aware Foundation, they keep her name in the conversation. Because if the system isn't going to get them the answer, they will keep walking that mountain themselves until they find her. A grandmother of 7 children went up the mountain to see somebody she trusted. She had a normal phone call with her daughter just hours before. And then, somewhere between his front door and a wooded patch on the backside of Carter Mountain, she ended up on her back in the front seat of her own van, kicking at a windshield with bare feet, trying to push somebody off of her. Then, the mountain swallowed her, and the silence has lasted ever since. There's a strange paradox at the heart of this case. We live in an era of cell phones, security cameras, GPS pings, social media, and constant digital footprints, the kind of world where it should be almost impossible to vanish without a trace. And yet, on a chilly Tuesday evening in November of 2012, a 19-year-old girl walked out of her apartment in a busy college town, headed toward an Amtrak station less than a mile away, and stepped clean off the face of the earth. No body, no struggle, no CCTV, no final cry for help. The only person who likely knows what happened to her then spent the next 13 years running from her ghost, hiding behind one fake name after another in cities all across America. This is the case of Sage Smith. Let me set the scene properly, because the location matters. It's November 20th, 2012, Charlottesville, Virginia, a vibrant, bustling college town built around the University of Virginia. Thanksgiving is just days away. There's a chill in the air, the kind that makes your breath fog when you step outside. The streets are alive, students cramming for finals, locals running last errands before the holiday, restaurants packed, cars rolling down West Main Street, the Amtrak station humming with people heading home for the long weekend. Charlottesville, at 6 p.m. in late November, is not a dark, lonely place. It is loud, it is bright, it is full of witnesses. That's where Sage Smith lived. Sage was 19 years old, a young black transgender woman who had finally, after a turbulent few years, started to figure out who she was. She had recently moved out of her grandmother's house and into her own apartment on West Main Street, a bright pink-walled space in the middle of the action. She was taking classes. She had just reconciled with her father, a man named Dean Smith. She was living openly and unapologetically as a transgender woman, and her people loved her for it. Her family loved her. Her friends loved her. Her phone was practically welded to her hand. She texted her grandmother constantly, called her friends non-stop, kept everyone she cared about looped into her every move. She was, in the most modern sense of the word, connected. That's the detail you have to lock in. Sage did not go dark. Ever. Voluntary disappearance was not in her vocabulary. On the evening of November 20th, she gets dressed for a date. Gray sweatpants, a black jacket with a hoodie, and these very distinctive rain boots, gray and black on the outside with bright purple and pink lining inside. She's meeting a guy named Eric McFadden. The plan is to link up at the Amtrak station, just a short walk down West Main Street from her apartment. Now, the timeline of what happened next is recorded almost down to the minute, because Sage was on her phone the whole time, and the phone records are where this case goes from sad to terrifying. From 6:18 p.m. to 6:37 p.m., Sage is on a continuous phone call with a friend from Northern Virginia. Just a normal conversation. She's walking, she's chatting, everything sounds fine. Now here's where it gets strange. At 6:27 p.m., right in the middle of that phone call, Eric McFadden sends Sage a text message. The text reads, "Bye, you stood me up SMH. Stood him up? Shaking my head. Bye. Hold on a second. Let's look at that." Sage is, at that exact moment, actively walking toward the Amtrak station. She's literally on her way to meet him. She is not standing him up. She is on her way. So why is McFadden, who supposedly is waiting for her at the meeting spot, already declaring she ghosted him before she even arrives? A few minutes later, at 6:35 p.m., a witness sees Sage in the 400 block of West Main Street. They have a casual chat. Sage tells the witness she's headed to the Amtrak station to meet someone, normal as can be. At 6:40 p.m., somebody spots Sage one final time. She's walking west, heading toward that transit hub, and then nothing. The phone goes silent. The texts stop. The witnesses stop. She doesn't come home that night. She doesn't show up to class. She misses calls. She misses Thanksgiving with her family. The grandmother who got a text from her almost every hour of every day suddenly hears nothing. The friends who couldn't get her off the phone are getting voicemail. Her father is panicking. Sage Smith has evaporated. Police get the case, and almost immediately, one name lights up like a flare on the suspect board. Eric McFadden, the guy she was meeting that night. When officers manage to get McFadden on the phone, his story is simple. He says, yeah, they were supposed to meet up, but Sage never showed. He sent her a text and gave up. End of story. Just a girl who flaked on a date. The Charlottesville police ask him, very politely, to come down to the station for a formal in-person interview. McFadden agrees. McFadden does not show up. In fact, by the time officers go looking for him, McFadden is gone. He has packed his bags and disappeared, not just from his neighborhood, not just from Charlottesville. He's gone from the entire state of Virginia. Police are now staring at a case where they have lost both the victim and the only person who knows what happened to her. A double disappearance. Now, this is where the logic of this whole case starts to crack open. Let's pick it apart piece by piece. First, the location. Sage didn't vanish from a dark stretch of backwoods road. She didn't vanish from an empty parking lot at 3 in the morning. She vanished from a few blocks of West Main Street in downtown Charlottesville, a busy, well-lit, foot traffic-heavy area on a Tuesday evening, less than a week before a major holiday. The Amtrak station is full of cameras. The restaurants are full of cameras. The traffic lights are full of cameras. So how do you abduct a 19-year-old girl out of that environment without a single eyewitness seeing a scuffle, without any CCTV capturing a struggle, without one person from the dozens of passing cars noticing anything off? It tells you something. Whoever Sage was meeting that night was not a stranger jumping out of the bushes. It was someone she expected to see, someone she walked right up to. Someone whose presence raised exactly 0 red flags until it was too late. Now let's talk about that text message. The 6:27 p.m. by you stood me up SMH. This is the kind of detail that prosecutors live for, because if you really break it down, that text doesn't make any sense. Sage was on the phone, walking toward him. She arrived at the meeting area minutes later. There was no version of reality where she stood him up. That text is what investigators would call a preemptive alibi. It's the kind of message you send before you do something, so that later, when people pull your phone records, it looks like you and the missing person never actually connected. Sage's father has said publicly that he believes the text was sent to manufacture an alibi. And here's the thing that makes it worse. McFadden's own story didn't even stay consistent. While telling police one thing, he sent an email to his girlfriend telling her a completely different story. In that email, he admitted that he did meet Sage that night. He said he walked away from her because she started talking to some men in a car. Then, weirdly, he claimed Sage was trying to blackmail him. Wait, hold on. So which one is it? Did she stand you up? Or did you meet her and walk away? Did she vanish before you saw her or after? Innocent people don't have two completely opposite stories about the same evening. Innocent people have one story because they only lived one version of the night. But the biggest red flag, by far, is what McFadden did next. He fled. Not just bailed on the interview. He erased himself. He left the state. He started using fake names. He bounced from Baltimore to Joppa, Maryland to Atlanta, going by the name Frank Hargrave. Then he resurfaced in Lake City, South Carolina, and Columbia, and New York City, calling himself Miles Bakari. He was living transient lives, taking gig jobs, dodging paperwork, never staying anywhere too long. Let's really sit with that for a second. If you are innocent and your date ghosts you, you might be annoyed. You might be scared of getting pulled into a police investigation. You might even avoid a phone call or two. But do you walk away from your entire life? Do you stop talking to your family? Do you change your name? Do you live as a ghost across the East Coast and eventually all the way to the West Coast for over a decade? Innocent people don't do that. Innocent people get a lawyer. They show up to the interview. They cooperate. They go home. They do not erase themselves from existence for 13 years. Sage's family, in the meantime, was forced to grieve in slow motion. They watched white college students like Hannah Graham and Morgan Harrington, beautiful, terrible cases that deserved every ounce of attention they got, receive immediate national manhunts, full FBI mobilization, 24-hour news cycles. And then they watched their daughter, a black transgender woman, get a fraction of that response. They had to fight year after year just to keep her name in the conversation. In 2016, Charlottesville police finally reclassified the case from a missing person investigation to a homicide. They had accepted what the family had known all along. Sage was not coming home alive. And then, just when it felt like the case had calcified into another forgotten file, came the update that nobody saw coming. November 2025, almost exactly 13 years to the day after Sage walked down West Main Street and disappeared. Charlottesville Police Chief Michael Cochise stepped to a podium and announced a breakthrough that nobody in that family had dared to hope for. Detectives had finally tracked down Eric McFadden. They had found him. He was in Los Angeles, all the way across the country, living under yet another assumed name. This time he was going by Shiloh Mathis and was, in fact, actively trying to legally change his name to it when investigators caught up with him. Detectives flew out to California and sat down with him for an hour-long interview. The exact contents of that interview are still sealed. The investigation is now active in a way it hasn't been in over a decade. Modern forensic techniques that didn't exist in 2012 are being applied to evidence that has been sitting in storage for 13 years. But here's the gut punch. They've found him. And he's still not talking. Not really. The man who almost certainly knows where Sage Smith is, the man who ran across an entire country and shed 3 different identities to avoid this exact moment, is sitting in a Los Angeles interview room and giving the police as little as he can. Sage is still gone. Her grandmother is still waiting. Her father is still waiting. A $20,000 reward is still active. The case is open. So that's where we sit today. A 19-year-old girl in pink-lined rain boots went out on a chilly November evening to meet a man for a date. She walked down a busy street under streetlights surrounded by witnesses, and somehow, somewhere between her apartment and the Amtrak station, she stepped off the edge of the visible world. And the man she went to meet spent the next 13 years running from her ghost. The only question now is whether the running is finally over. A quick advisory before we start. This case involves allegations of historical child sexual abuse that didn't surface publicly until more than a decade after the victim disappeared. We're going to discuss that motive with the seriousness it deserves without graphic detail. Here's a question. If your daughter texts you to say she's at the airport, but her cell phone is pinging off a tower 50 miles south of the airport, who exactly is texting you? Because it isn't your daughter. Somebody is sitting in a quiet patch of rural Virginia holding a 19-year-old girl's phone in their hands, typing in her voice, pretending to be her while she's already gone. That is the central horror of the case of Caitlin Akins. Her killer didn't just take her life. He stole her phone, her name, and her voice, and used them to buy himself a head start that ended up lasting a decade. This is the story of a digital ghost, and the man whose hands held that phone is finally, in 2026, sitting in a Virginia jail cell. Let me set the stage. It's December 5th, 2015, the thick of holiday travel season. Airports are at full capacity. Reagan National, Dulles, BWI, lines wrapping back through the terminals. Stressed out parents wrangling luggage, college kids flying home for the holidays, travelers grabbing coffee with one eye on the departures board. It's that specific late fall energy where the country feels like one giant transit hub. Right in the middle of all that chaos, a 19-year-old girl named Caitlin Akins is about to start a long trip home. Caitlin's story up to this point is actually beautiful. She's 19 years old, bright, ambitious, and she has just done what every kid eventually does. She got out of town. She had recently moved across the country to Lake Havasu City, Arizona, where she had enrolled in cosmetology school. She was building a life out there with her fiancé, Amber Rios. She had her own apartment, her own school, her own future, her own person. By every measure, Caitlin's life was finally clicking into place. She had come back home to Virginia for her mom's wedding. While she was in town, she was also going to pick up her high school diploma from her old school. She had it with her in her suitcase, this little symbol of everything she had finished and everything she was about to start. She was scheduled to fly back to Arizona on December 5th, where Amber would be waiting for her at the gate. She had to get to Reagan National Airport, which is about 80 miles north of where her family was staying. So on the morning of December 5th, her mother, Lisa Sullivan, drove Caitlin to the home of a man named James Branton in the small community of Partlow in Spotsylvania County. Branton was Caitlin's former stepfather. He had been married to Lisa years earlier, and despite the divorce, he had remained on amicable terms with the family. He had volunteered to drive Caitlin those 80 miles north to the airport so she could catch her flight home. Caitlin got into Branton's car with her suitcase. Lisa hugged her goodbye. She watched them pull out of the driveway and head north on the highway. Lisa would never see her daughter again. Now, this is where the timeline starts to lie. Pay attention to the clocks, because every minute of this is going to matter. At 11:56 a.m., Caitlin's fiancée Amber, all the way out in Arizona, gets a text from Caitlin's phone. The message reads, "Something came up. I'm not coming back today. I won't be able to text for a bit." Hold on. Stop. Read that again. Coming from a 19-year-old whose entire life is in Arizona, whose fiancé is at home waiting for her, who is on her way to the airport, that message is deeply weird. Caitlin texts Amber constantly. They are one of those couples who narrate every gas station bathroom and every traffic jam. A text from Caitlin saying, "I won't be able to text for a bit," is, by itself, the digital equivalent of a smoke alarm. A little later that day, around 1:50 p.m., James Branton texts Lisa, the mother. His message says that he didn't actually drive Caitlin to the airport. He says that because of traffic, he dropped Caitlin off at the Springfield metro station so she could take the train the rest of the way north to Reagan National. Lisa reads that text, and her heart stops, because Lisa knows something Branton apparently didn't think to consider. Caitlin had not ridden the Washington, D.C. metro since she was 6 or 7 years old. She did not know that system. She wouldn't have known which line. She wouldn't have known which transfer. She wouldn't have been able to navigate it with a roller suitcase. Branton's claim that this 19-year-old girl was going to figure out the metro alone, with luggage, with a flight to catch, did not match the daughter Lisa knew. But the texts kept coming. At 2 p.m., Lisa got another message from Caitlin's phone. "I'm at the airport, battery dying so won't be able to text for a bit." Then, hours later, at 7:15 p.m., a final text from Caitlin's phone. "I'm staying with a friend. I need some time alone." And then, silence. The next morning, in Arizona, Amber drove to the airport and waited at the arrival's gate. The plane landed. The passengers walked off. Caitlin was not among them. Amber called the airline. They confirmed it. Caitlin had never checked in for her flight. She had never made it through security. She had never set foot inside Reagan National Airport. 2 days later, the next piece surfaced. A Virginia Department of Transportation worker, mowing or clearing along River Road in Spotsylvania County, spotted something blue in a drainage ditch. He walked over. It was a roller suitcase, Caitlin's suitcase. Inside the bag, neatly zipped where she had left them, were her wallet, her cash, and her ID. But 2 specific items were missing: her clothing, gone, and her high school diploma, gone. Now let's start tearing into the logic of what we're actually looking at. Because by this point, the digital deception had already started to fall apart under its own weight. Let's start with the text messages, because they are the spine of this whole case. When police got involved, they did what every modern investigator does on a missing persons case in the cell phone era. They subpoenaed the carrier records for Caitlin's phone. They wanted to know which cell towers her phone had pinged off of and when. Because a phone tells the truth even when the person holding it is lying. The records came back, and they were devastating. Caitlin's phone had never gone north, not to the metro, not to Springfield, not to the airport. The phone had stayed in the Fredericksburg and Spotsylvania area the entire afternoon. It had never traveled further north than Stafford County, which is still way short of Washington, D.C. So when that 2 p.m. text said, "I'm at the airport," the phone sending that message was sitting somewhere in the rural Virginia farmland 50 miles south of the airport. That isn't Caitlin telling her mom she's at the gate. That is somebody else, holding her phone, typing her words, pretending to be her, while they sit in a stationary location near the very same neighborhood she vanished from. That is a manufactured trail. A breadcrumb path designed to make the family believe Caitlin had made it to the airport and gotten on her flight, when in reality she was gone long before any of those texts were ever sent. To verify, police pulled hundreds of hours of CCTV footage. Reagan National Airport, the Springfield Metro Station, the Springfield Mall, every camera that could have caught a 19-year-old girl with a roller suitcase. And in every frame, on every camera, across every angle, Caitlin Akins did not appear. Not once. She had never been at any of those locations. Then there's the suitcase, the detail that confused investigators the most. Look at what was left inside: wallet, cash, ID. Now apply the basic logic test we've used in every case in this series. If you are a 19-year-old college student running away from your life, the very first things you take with you are your money and your identification. You don't ditch your wallet in a drainage ditch off River Road. You don't leave your driver's license behind. You can't even buy a sandwich without an ID. But what was missing? Her clothing and her high school diploma. Stop and think about that combination. A killer who is trying to fake a runaway disappearance dumps the entire suitcase. A killer who is in a panicked rush also dumps the entire suitcase. So who carefully unpacks specific items? Her clothes, gone. Her diploma, that little physical symbol of her accomplishment, gone. The contents of that bag look curated, like somebody pulled out the parts that meant something to Caitlin personally and tossed the rest in the rain. Investigators noted that the configuration looked staged. And then there is the behavior of James Branton. When Caitlin's family started begging him for help, when the police started asking him to come in and clarify the timeline, when investigators offered him a polygraph to clear his name, Branton went silent. He refused the polygraph. He refused to provide the password to his cell phone, which was heavily encrypted and which investigators believed could have contained crucial communications and location data. He stopped cooperating. He stopped helping. He stopped being the helpful former stepfather. He turned into a wall. Now, if you are an innocent man whose former stepdaughter has just vanished after you supposedly dropped her at a metro station, you do everything. You take the polygraph, you unlock the phone, you walk the cops through every minute, you burn down the world to find her, you do not lock down. People who lock down are people with things to hide. But for over a decade, Branton walked free. Not because he was clear, because the prosecutors couldn't quite get over the wall of a missing body and a stonewalling suspect. Until April of 2026. That's when the case blew wide open in a way that nobody saw coming. The Spotsylvania Sheriff's Office arrested James Branton. But the charges they arrested him on were not for Caitlin's disappearance. They were arresting him on horrific historical charges of aggravated sexual battery and child cruelty. The affidavits filed alleged that Branton was facing severe historical felony charges for the systematic abuse of Caitlin and her younger sister, dating back a decade. Read that again, 10 years old. And suddenly, the entire missing persons case clicked into a different shape. For the first time, investigators had a real motive. Caitlin, in December of 2015, wasn't just a 19-year-old going home to Arizona. She was a young adult, finally living independently, finally building a life with her fiancé, finally far enough from Virginia and the past to be someone who might find the courage to tell the truth. And Branton, the man driving her to the airport, was somebody who had everything to lose if she did. After the April 2026 arrest, a massive coalition descended on 3 properties tied to Branton: the FBI, the Virginia State Police, the George Mason University Police Department, which brought in advanced drone technology. They came in with excavators. They came in with ground-penetrating radar. They tore open the dirt across multiple acres, looking for Caitlin's remains. The April 2026 excavations did not immediately find her body. Branton remains in custody, facing severe felony sex crimes that could put him away for the rest of his life. Authorities are now methodically building a circumstantial homicide case on top of the existing charges, determined to bring Caitlin home. A 19-year-old college student got into a car on a December morning to ride 80 miles to the airport. She had her diploma in her suitcase, her fiancé waiting in Arizona, and her entire adult life laid out in front of her. She never made the flight. Her digital ghost spent the rest of that afternoon typing texts in her voice from the back roads of Spotsylvania. It took 10 years for the truth about that morning to begin catching up to the man behind the wheel. And the only question left is whether anyone is going to bring her home before he stops talking forever. Imagine telling a police officer this with a straight face. "I left my girlfriend at home for 10 minutes to go get ice cream. When I came back, she was just gone. No note, no phone call. She didn't take her phone. She didn't take her glasses. She didn't take her purse. She didn't take her keys. She didn't take her 2-year-old daughter. I have no idea where she went." That is the story that Paul Jordan II told the Franklin County Sheriff's Office in April of 2012, and it's the story he would keep telling in various forms for the next decade. The problem? Pretty much every single physical molecule inside that little house on Shady Lane was waiting to call him a liar. This is the case of Heather Hodges, and it's a case where the man who told the most ridiculous lie in modern Virginia history almost got away with it. Let me put you in the setting. It's April 9th, 2012. Rocky Mount, Virginia, Franklin County. We are deep in the foothills of the Blue Ridge Mountains, in a quiet, rural, tight-knit corner of Virginia where everybody knows everybody. The country roads wind for miles between houses, and a Monday night looks like a porch light, a dog barking somewhere down the holler, and not much else. The Shady Lane neighborhood is a modest little stretch of working-class homes, the kind of place where people leave their doors unlocked and wave at strangers from the mailbox. But inside one of those houses, the air is poison. That's where Heather D'Allian Hodges lives. She's 22 years old, small, just barely 5 feet tall, only about 100 pounds, blonde, blue-eyed, with a little Tinkerbell tattoo on her lower back. And she is, above everything else, a mother. Her 2-year-old daughter is the absolute center of her universe. Heather is the kind of mom who friends describe as fiercely protective. She has fought to keep that little girl safe in ways that, by 2012, had already worn lines into her face. Because Heather is also living with her boyfriend, a man named Paul Scooter Jordan II, and the relationship is a documented horror show. Friends and family had seen Heather over and over again with severe visible injuries across her torso, extensive bruising, the kind of injuries that don't come from falling down stairs. Witnesses documented a severe and ongoing pattern of physical abuse inside that house. She had previously gone and stayed with friends specifically to protect her daughter from Paul's rages. She knew she was in a bad situation. But here's the most important detail about Heather, and you need to hold on to it. She was not a runaway, she was a fighter, and she was a mother. Whatever else was wrong in her life, she did not abandon her 2-year-old daughter. Not for a day, not for an hour, not for a minute. That is the psychological anchor of this entire case. Everything else collapses against it. Now let's walk through what was supposedly the night she vanished. At 6:30 in the morning of April 9th, 2012, a family member drops Heather off at the house on Shady Lane. That is the last time anybody outside that house, anyone independent, ever sees her alive. From that moment on, the only witness to Heather's life is Paul Jordan II. He'll later say that the day passed normally, he and Heather and the toddler. Just a quiet Monday. Then, at around 10:30 p.m., Paul says he got a craving. He decided to drive out to the local Dairy Queen and grab himself a Blizzard. He tells the cops that the trip took him maybe 10 or 15 minutes round trip. He walks back into the house with his ice cream, and the house is empty. Heather is gone, vanished, just like that. Now stop and think about that for a second. A 22-year-old woman with a 2-year-old daughter in a tiny rural Virginia town completely evaporated from a house in roughly 600 seconds. Where did she go? She didn't have a car waiting outside. No friend ever showed up to pick her up. No taxi was called. No Uber existed in Rocky Mount in 2012 in any meaningful way. There's no bus stop on Shady Lane. So we're meant to believe she just opened the front door and walked off into the rural Virginia darkness in April on foot, and the things she left behind. Hold on. Let's actually look at this list. Her purse was still in the house. Her keys were still in the house. Her cell phone was still in the house. Her glasses were still in the house. And most importantly, her 2-year-old daughter was still in the house. Let's apply common sense one item at a time. If you are walking away from your life to start over, the first thing you grab is your phone. Your phone is your lifeline. It's how you reach anybody who might help you. She left it. If you are walking away to start over, the second thing you grab is money or identification, which is in your purse. She left it. Heather needed corrective lenses to see clearly. You do not walk off into the pitch-black mountains of Franklin County at 10 at night on rural unlit roads when you can't see your own hand in front of your face. She left her glasses. And then there is the child, a fiercely protective mother, a woman who had previously gone into hiding specifically to protect this little girl. And we're supposed to believe that the very same mother just abandoned her daughter in a house with her abusive partner and walked off into the night with no phone, no money, no glasses, no plan, in 10 minutes? It is, on its face, the most ridiculous story anyone has ever told the Franklin County Sheriff's Office. And it gets worse. Because here's the kicker. Paul Jordan didn't report her missing on April 9th. He didn't report her missing on the morning of April 10th. He waited a full 2 days before calling the police. 2 days during which his girlfriend supposedly had vanished from the house barefoot and blind into rural Virginia, and he just did nothing. He admitted openly to Deputy Webb that he never called her phone once. His justification? He claimed she had lost her phone and changed the code. He just stayed at home. A man whose girlfriend with a 2-year-old child has supposedly disappeared into thin air sees no urgency, sees no reason to drive around looking, sees no reason to call her family, sees no reason to do anything except sit in the house. That isn't worry. That is waiting. But here's where it gets strange, in a way that really cracks the alibi open. The Dairy Queen story was a lie. We know it was a lie because of the bank records. While Paul was supposedly out grabbing a quick ice cream, somebody pulled Heather's debit card out of her purse, the purse that was sitting inside the house she had supposedly just walked away from, and withdrew $400. $400. When investigators eventually confronted Paul about this, his explanation was that he needed the money for diapers and dog food at 10:30 at night, right after his girlfriend vanished. Now this is where the case sat for years. Heather missing. Paul technically a person of interest but not arrested. The case treated as a missing persons file. And then, in May of 2012, just a few weeks after Heather disappeared, investigators finally got a search warrant for the house on Shady Lane. What they found is the moment this case stopped being a missing persons file and became a homicide, Paul Jordan had moved out completely. He had stripped the house bare, every piece of furniture gone. The home was hollow, echoing, empty. But he had left one thing behind. He couldn't take it with him: the carpet. When investigators pulled back the bedroom carpet, they found a massive concentrated area of forensic evidence underneath. The wooden floorboards beneath the carpet were thoroughly saturated. Whatever happened in that bedroom hadn't been a small accident. It had been an event. It had been a catastrophic, violent event that resulted in significant blood loss, saturating through the carpet and into the floor itself. You don't get that volume of blood from a nosebleed. You don't get it from a small cut. You get it from massive catastrophic injury. And then they found the doorknob. The DNA from the blood on the doorknob could not exclude Heather Hodges as the contributor. But the truly damning detail was sitting right inside that blood. A fingerprint. A perfectly preserved fingerprint pressed into Heather's blood on the back of the bedroom doorknob. The fingerprint belonged to Paul Jordan II. Hold on a second. Let's really sit with that. A fingerprint in blood is not a casual contact. It's not the kind of thing that happens because somebody touched a doorknob once and didn't wash their hands. A fingerprint set in blood means a person was bleeding heavily enough, recently enough, and physically close enough that the wet blood was sitting on that doorknob when Paul Jordan's hand closed around it. He had to grip that handle while her blood was still fresh. There is no innocent version of that fingerprint. Then, in 2017, investigator Holly Willoughby went back at Paul Jordan with everything they had. And the story changed. Suddenly, the Dairy Queen alibi was abandoned. He admitted that one was a lie. Now he claimed he had actually gone out to buy illegal pills. And the disappearance? He pivoted again. Now he claimed Heather hadn't vanished in 10 minutes. She had packed a couple of changes of clothes and voluntarily moved to Nebraska after an argument, in which, by his telling, he had merely jerked her up and set her down on the couch. Nebraska. A 22-year-old mother with no car packed up a couple of t-shirts, somehow got to Nebraska without a phone or her glasses or her ID, and never contacted her daughter or her family for over a decade. That's the second story. And it's somehow even worse than the first. In April of 2022, 10 years almost to the day after Heather vanished, a Franklin County grand jury indicted Paul Jordan II. In June of 2023, a jury convicted him of second-degree murder and concealment of a dead body. In August of 2023, he was sentenced to an active 35 years in prison, 30 for the murder, 5 for hiding her body. In April of 2025, the Virginia Court of Appeals affirmed every part of the conviction, calling the forensic evidence overwhelming and pointing directly at the fingerprint in the blood as the moment this case stopped being circumstantial. But here's the cruelty that lives at the end of this story. Paul Jordan still claims he didn't do it. He's still insisting on his innocence from his prison cell. He has never told anyone where Heather is. Ground-penetrating radar searches, cadaver dogs, volunteer search teams, nothing has ever turned up her remains. So a man went out for a 10-minute Dairy Queen run, came back to a saturated bedroom carpet and a fingerprint in fresh blood, and then sat on a couch for 2 days before calling for help. The state of Virginia knows who killed Heather Hodges. The courts know it. The jury knew it. The appeals court knew it. The only thing nobody knows is where her body is. And the man who claimed to love her plans to take that answer to the grave. Picture this: a cozy clubhouse on a freezing December night, the smell of cookies, hot cider, and pine needles, Christmas lights blinking against fogged-up windows, about 100 neighbors crammed into one big festive room, laughing too loud, kids running underfoot. And somewhere in the middle of all that warmth and noise, a 5-year-old little girl in a Big Bird sweater walks across the room to grab one last handful of potato chips. She is surrounded by adults. She's surrounded by other children. She is 20 feet from her mother. And in the next 60 seconds, she will disappear from the face of the earth, and nobody, not one single person in that crowded room, will see how it happened. This is the case of Melissa Brannon. Let me set the scene for you properly, because the atmosphere of that night is the entire reason this case is so terrifying. It's December 3rd, 1989, Lorton, Virginia, a working-class pocket of Fairfax County about 30 minutes south of D.C. The Woodside Apartments are a sprawling, family-friendly complex, and tonight is the big annual Christmas party in the clubhouse. This isn't some sterile corporate event. This is neighbors who actually know each other. Single moms, blue-collar dads, retirees, and a whole pack of kids who run together on the playground every afternoon. The buffet is loaded with the usual stuff: cold cuts, sugar cookies, a punch bowl, and bowls of chips that the kids keep raiding. In the middle of all of it is Tammy Brannon, a young single mother, and her little girl, Melissa. Melissa is 5 years old. She's shy, gentle, the kind of kid who clings to her mom's leg when strangers say hi. She's wearing a blue Big Bird sweater that her mom bought from JCPenney and a matching plaid skirt. A few weeks before this night, somebody captured her on a home video shyly singing "Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer." That little clip would end up broadcast on every news station in America. But right now she's just a kid at a Christmas party, full of sugar and excitement, sticking close to mom. It's getting late, around 10 o'clock. Tammy starts gathering their coats to head home, and Melissa, in that classic little kid way, asks if she can run back for one more handful of potato chips for the walk. Tammy says yes. Why wouldn't she? They're in a clubhouse full of neighbors. The snack table is right there. Melissa walks toward the chips, and then nothing. When Tammy looks up a moment later, her daughter is not at the snack table. She's not in the bathroom. She's not with the other kids. She's not anywhere. The party that was loud and warm and ordinary 1 minute earlier is now the scene of a mother's worst nightmare. Tammy starts calling Melissa's name. Neighbors join in. People check under tables, behind the Christmas tree, out in the parking lot. Within minutes, the police are on the property. Within an hour, the search has exploded into something massive. Officers, neighbors, volunteers, all sweeping the dark, freezing apartment complex with flashlights, calling the name of a little girl in a Big Bird sweater. They check the trash chutes, they check the dumpsters, they check the wooded areas at the edge of the property. 300 people will eventually join this search. They will print up bumper stickers that say, "Bring Melissa Brannon home for Christmas." But no one will find her. Not that night, not the next day, not in 35 years. Now, here's where the investigation pivots, and pivots fast. Detectives start interviewing every adult who was at the party, and one name keeps surfacing. A 24-year-old man named Caleb Daniel Hughes. He's the complex's groundskeeper. He knows every building, every shortcut, every storage shed, every dark corner of the property. He was at the party that night. And here's the part that makes a detective's ears perk up. He left the clubhouse at the exact same time Melissa vanished. So police pay him a visit. They knock on his door early the next morning, and his wife, Carol, actually cooperates with them. She lets them in. And what they find inside that apartment is the kind of thing that makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up. The washing machine is running. Inside it, the exact outfit Caleb wore to the party: his shirt, his pants, his belt, the sheath for a large knife, and his shoes. Now, hold on a second. Who throws their shoes and their belt into the washing machine at 12:30 in the morning, right after a neighborhood Christmas party? Have you ever, in your life, washed your belt? But it gets weirder. When the police actually pull the shoes out, they realize the sides of the soles have been deliberately cut off. Somebody took a knife and shaved the rubber off the edges of these shoes. And the only reason a person on planet Earth shaves the rubber off the sides of their own shoes is if they think something is soaked into those soles that they desperately need to get rid of. Soil, blood, something. Then there's the car. A red Honda Civic. His wife notices it has more miles on it than it should. Caleb has an answer ready. He says he took the long way home to grab a six-pack of beer. But let's look at that for a second. He claims to have arrived home around 12:30 a.m. after grabbing beer. The problem? In Virginia in 1989, you could not legally buy alcohol after midnight. So either he's lying about when he got home, or he's lying about why he was out, or he's lying about both. The math doesn't math. The alibi doesn't alibi. Now this is where it gets strange in a way that changed forensic science forever. The Honda Civic looks clean, vacuumed even. To the naked eye, it's just a dude's car. But the FBI lab in Quantico gets a hold of it, and they go to work microscopically. They tear that car apart fiber by fiber. And what they find on the front passenger seat will become one of the most important pieces of forensic evidence in Virginia history. They find blue acrylic fibers, dozens of them, saturated into the upholstery. So the FBI buys an identical JCPenney Big Bird sweater, pulls fibers from it, and compares them under the microscope. Perfect match. Same proprietary textile blend, same dye lot, same everything, and then they find something else. Tiny strands of rabbit fur. Specifically, rabbit fur from the rare coat that Tammy Brannon, Melissa's mother, had been wearing at the party. Now think about what that means. Tammy hadn't been anywhere near Caleb Hughes that night. So how does her rabbit fur end up on his passenger seat? It only works one way. The fur transferred from Tammy onto Melissa when Tammy was hugging her or carrying her at the party. And then it transferred from Melissa onto that passenger seat. Melissa was in that car, sitting in that seat. She was that close to her mother's hug, and then she was in his car. But here's the thing. They never found her body. So how do you prosecute a murder when you don't have a victim's remains? In 1989, Virginia, you couldn't. State law required you to prove a location of death to charge a homicide if there was no body. So the prosecutor, a guy named Robert Horan, got creative. He charged Hughes with abduction with intent to defile. The defense pushed back hard. They argued that fiber transfer happens all the time, that a kid at an apartment complex could have brushed up against the groundskeeper 100 times, that this was just routine cross-contamination. But hold on, let's actually look at that argument. We are not talking about one stray fiber. We're not even talking about 10. We're talking about over 50 matching fibers from the sweater alone, deeply embedded in the carpet and the upholstery of his car. That kind of saturation does not happen from a casual hello. You don't get that level of fiber transfer from waving at the groundskeeper across the parking lot. You get that level of transfer when a child is sitting in your passenger seat, squirming, sliding, maybe struggling. The fibers tell a story, and that story is that Melissa Brannon was inside Caleb Hughes's red Honda Civic that night. The jury agreed. In 1991, Hughes was convicted. 50 years. And it was a landmark case. The first time in Virginia history that someone was convicted of an abduction-style crime against a missing child without any physical body ever being recovered. Pure forensic science, pure logic gap. The fibers placed her in his car. The shaved shoes pointed to a frantic cleanup. The midnight beer alibi was a mathematical impossibility. Every brick of evidence stacked on the next until there was a wall too thick to argue around. But here is the gut punch. Here's the part that has haunted Tammy Brannon and Melissa's family for 35 years. Caleb Hughes never said a word. He served his time. He filed appeals. He kept his mouth shut. And in August of 2019, on good behavior, he was released on parole. He walked out of prison a free man, and Melissa was still missing. Still missing. Now think about the logic of that for a second. If he was guilty enough to lose half his life over the fibers of her sweater, why did he take the location of her body to his grave? What was he hiding that was somehow worse than the conviction he already had? Because if he just told them where she was, he was already serving the sentence. There was no extra penalty waiting. The only reason a man keeps that secret is if revealing the location would expose something even darker about what happened that night. And then, in May of 2024, the story took one more grim turn. Hughes, out on parole, registered as a sex offender, was arrested again. The reason? Investigators discovered he had been working as a babysitter. He was alone with children. He was once again, somehow, in proximity to the exact population he was forbidden by law to be near. He was sent back to prison. He is now expected to serve out his entire original sentence, all the way to 2039 or beyond. But Melissa is still gone, so that's where we are. A 5-year-old little girl in a Big Bird sweater walked across a crowded clubhouse for one more handful of potato chips. Her mother looked up, and she was gone. The fibers told us where she went. The science told us who took her. But the man who knows what happened next has spent 35 years staring at the wall, refusing to say a word. Tammy Brannon never got her daughter back. The Woodside apartments are still there. The clubhouse is still there. And every December, somewhere in Lorton, Virginia, a Christmas party rolls around, and a mother somewhere still asks the question nobody can answer. Where is Melissa? Imagine you're a prosecutor in 1980. A young woman has vanished. You know who killed her. You can feel it. The evidence is everywhere. Blood in a cabin, a frantic cleanup, missing towels, a broken ankle bracelet on the stairs, a panicked suspect asking questions only a guilty man would ask. But you are missing one thing: the body. And in the Commonwealth of Virginia in 1980, no prosecutor in history had ever convicted a man of murder without a body. Not once. It was considered impossible. The wall every prosecutor hit. And then came the disappearance of an 18-year-old freshman from Radford University, a girl named Gina Renee Hall. And everything changed. Let me take you back to the night this started, because the contrast between where Gina started and where she ended up is genuinely chilling. It's Saturday, June 28th, 1980, summer in Southwest Virginia. The college towns of Radford and Blacksburg are crawling with students who just finished their summer session exams and want to blow off steam. Big hair, denim, the smell of cheap beer, and Marlboro Lights, ABBA and the Eagles bleeding out of every car stereo. The hottest spot in town that night is the nightclub inside the Blacksburg Marriott Inn. It's wall-to-wall college kids. The dance floor's packed, the drinks are flowing. It is, to use the technical term, a complete scene. And right in the middle of it is Gina Renee Hall. Now I want you to really see Gina, because her psychological profile is the whole reason this case doesn't add up. She's 18 years old, a freshman. She's small, 5 feet tall, just over 100 pounds. She's living with her older sister Dlana in an apartment while taking summer classes. By every account from every person who knew her, She was sweet, soft-spoken, modest to the point of being painfully shy. And there's a reason for that. As a little girl, Gina survived a severe accident that left her with extensive burn scars across her body. Those scars shaped her entire adult personality. She was deeply self-conscious. She didn't do casual flings. She didn't go off with strange men. She was not the kind of girl who disappears into the night with somebody she just met at a bar. Hold on to that detail, because the defense is going to try and make you forget it. That night, Gina borrows her sister's car. It's a brown Chevrolet, clean, immaculate, well cared for. She heads to the Marriott to dance, and somewhere on the floor, under the disco lights, she meets a guy named Stephen Epperly. Epperly is the exact opposite of Gina. He's older. He's a former Virginia Tech football player. Big, charismatic, the kind of guy who walks into a room and absorbs all the air. He's with a childhood friend that night, a guy named Bill King, and Epperly takes an interest in Gina. Now, here's where things shift. Just after midnight, Epperly gets the keys to a secluded lake house on Claytor Lake, a place owned by Bill King's parents. There's just one problem. Epperly doesn't have a car, so if anyone is driving to that cabin, it has to be Gina in her sister's borrowed Chevrolet, and she agrees. Stop and think about that for a second. We've already established that Gina was guarded, modest, careful, so how does Epperly get her into that car? We don't know. Maybe he was just that charming. Maybe she felt like she had something to prove. Maybe he lied about who else was coming. But she drives him. Out of the bright lights of Blacksburg, out past the city limits, deeper and deeper into the dark, winding back roads of Pulaski County until they reach Claytor Lake, and the vibe of this place flips entirely. The Marriott was loud and safe. Claytor Lake at 1 a.m. is the opposite, pitch black, dense Appalachian woods, deep cold water, no streetlights, no neighbors close enough to hear anything. At 1:30 in the morning, Gina makes a phone call from the cabin. She calls her sister Dlana, and she sounds totally normal. She tells Dlana she's at the lake with a guy named Steven. She says she'll be home by 6 a.m. because she has plans to meet a friend in the morning. That's the last time anyone in her family ever hears her voice. She doesn't come home at 6, she doesn't come home at noon. Dlana, who knew her sister better than anyone, knew immediately that something was wrong. Gina did not blow off plans. Gina did not vanish overnight with a stranger. Dlana called the Radford police that same day. Then, on June 30th, 2 days after Gina vanished, searchers find Dlana's brown Chevrolet. It's abandoned on a dirt road called Hazel Hollow, parked underneath a massive railroad trestle bridging the New River. And this is the first detail that just stops you cold. The car that left the cabin had to be driven somewhere by someone. Gina is gone. So who parked that car in the middle of nowhere, under a creepy railroad bridge in the woods, and walked away? The vehicle, which Dlana knew was spotless, was now full of uncharacteristic trash. Someone else had been inside it. Someone else had driven it. Police then turned their attention to the lake house itself. And what they find there might be the most chilling part of the entire story. The cabin has been scrubbed. Hard. There's a roll of paper towels missing. A can of bathroom cleaner, gone. A blue towel, a striped towel. The bath mat from the mid-level bathroom, a quilt from the mid-level bedroom. Every single one of these items has been removed from the home. Now, this is where it gets strange. You don't take the bath mat with you when you leave a vacation cabin. You don't steal the bathroom cleaner. Unless those were the items you used to wipe up something you desperately needed to make disappear. Because despite the cleanup, the evidence was still there. Forensic technicians using the serology techniques of the era found residual blood splatter, matching Gina's blood type, in not one room of that cabin, but 2. Whoever cleaned that cabin tried hard. They just didn't try hard enough. They couldn't get it out of the carpet fibers, the grout, the porous wood. And on top of all of that, investigators found Gina's broken ankle bracelet left behind in the home, snapped like it had been torn off in a struggle. A few days later, more items started appearing. The missing towels from the cabin, found dumped in the woods near the river, near where the car was abandoned. The contents of Gina's purse, scattered out there too, and her clothes, bloodstained, but here's the unsettling detail, not ripped, not torn. Whoever undressed Gina did it carefully, or did it after she was no longer able to fight back. Now, let's start tearing into the logic of all of this, because the defense in this case was going to come out swinging. Epperly's team wanted the jury to believe that Gina just left, that she got freaked out and ran off into the night. But hold on a second, let's actually look at that. Gina was a tiny, soft-spoken 18-year-old who didn't even feel comfortable wearing short sleeves because of her scars. We're supposed to believe she voluntarily walked away from a borrowed car in the pitch dark, in the woods, in rural Virginia, without her belongings, without her shoes, without her purse, without telling her sister she changed plans. It doesn't fit the person. It fits a victim. But here's the thing that made detectives' jaws drop. Before anyone had even officially declared Gina dead, before there was any reason for anyone to be talking about a body, Stephen Epperly was already asking a friend a very specific question. He wanted to know what could happen to him if they didn't find a body. Read that again. He didn't ask what could happen if they didn't find Gina. He didn't ask what could happen if she ran away. He asked about a body. That word came out of his mouth before it should have been in anyone's mouth. He was the first person in the entire investigation to introduce the concept that there was a body to find. Innocent people don't think in those terms. And then there's the cabin itself. If Epperly's story was true, if Gina just freaked out and bolted, why was the cabin scrubbed? Why were the towels gone? Why was the bathroom cleaner gone? You don't terror clean a borrowed cabin in the middle of the night because your date decided to walk home. You only do that if something happened in that cabin that you cannot afford for anyone to see. So now we hit the wall. The prosecutor, a man named Everett Shockley, looks at his evidence pile. He's got blood. He's got a panicked cleanup. He's got an ankle bracelet. He's got a suspect who is talking about bodies before anyone else is. He's got a car abandoned under a railroad trestle by someone other than the victim. What he doesn't have is Gina. He has never had Gina. And in 1980 Virginia, the legal doctrine of corpus delicti said you basically couldn't try a man for murder without producing the corpus, the body. The defense was confident. No body, no eyewitness, no confession. They thought they were untouchable. But Shockley pushed forward anyway. He stacked the circumstantial evidence brick by brick, the blood, the cleanup, the missing towels, the broken ankle bracelet, the body comment. And when the verdict came in, history shifted. Stephen Epperly was convicted of first-degree murder. It was the first ever no-body murder conviction in the Commonwealth of Virginia. It set the precedent that every Virginia no-body case since has been built on, including, as it would turn out decades later, the case of Heather Hodges and the case of Corey Bigsby. Gina's case is the foundation stone. But here's the part that still aches. Epperly is still alive. He's still in prison. He's been sitting in a cell for over 40 years. He still maintains his innocence. He still files appeals. He still goes before the parole board and asks to come home. And every single time the board denies him, Gina's sister Dlana stands up and pleads for him to stay locked away. As recently as 2024, his parole was denied yet again. And in all those decades, through all those appeals, through every hearing, every interview, every chance at a deal, Epperly has never told anyone where Gina is. Think about the cruelty of that. He's already serving the sentence. There is no extra time to add. There is nothing to gain by keeping the secret. There's only one reason a man holds on to information like that for 45 years. It's the last piece of power he has over a family that just wants to bring their girl home. She called her sister at 1:30 in the morning. She said she'd be back by 6. She borrowed a brown Chevrolet and drove out into the dark hills of the New River Valley, and somewhere out there in the woods, or under the cold water of Claytor Lake, or buried in soil that no search team has ever cracked open, Gina Renee Hall is still waiting. And the only man who knows where she is isn't talking. When a mother walked into her apartment at 7 in the morning on September 14, 2010, the first thing she noticed wasn't what was missing. It was what was sitting on her daughter's bed. Pajamas. Folded. Neatly resting on the comforter, exactly as if a 19-year-old girl had taken them off, set them down with care, and stepped into something else before walking out the door. Everything else her daughter owned was still there. Her clothes, her makeup, her ID, her shared family cell phone, her bank card. There was no chaos, there was no struggle. There was just a quiet apartment and a pair of folded pajamas and the absolute silence of a small Virginia town at dawn. This is the case of Samantha Clark. And it is the story of how a sleepy, historic town, with one bad phone call, learned that a monster had been living in their woods the whole time. Let me put you in the setting. It's September 13th, 2010. Orange, Virginia. A small, historic town in the middle of the state, the kind of place where the population is under 5,000, where the streets empty out by 9 at night, where everybody recognizes everybody else's car, and where the most exciting thing that happens on a Monday is a high school football scrimmage. Orange has rolling fields, 2-lane roads, deer in everyone's backyard, and that specific brand of rural Virginia quiet that makes outsiders think they've stepped into a postcard. The kind of town where people genuinely do leave their doors unlocked. The kind of town where, if you ask anybody in 2010, nothing bad ever happens. The kind of town where Samantha Ann Clark felt completely, deeply safe. Let me tell you about Samantha. She was 19 years old. She had just proudly graduated from Orange County High School 3 months earlier, in the summer of 2010. She was the kind of small-town kid who was instantly recognizable around her own neighborhood. People knew her face, knew her family, knew her name when she walked into the gas station for a soda. But her profile also tells you something incredibly important about what was about to happen. Samantha was extraordinarily vulnerable in a very specific way. She did not have a driver's license. She did not own a car. And she did not have her own cell phone. She shared a single mobile phone with her mother, Barbara Tinder. Think about that for a second. A 19-year-old in 2010 with no transportation of her own, no independent communication, no easy way to call for help if something went wrong. Samantha's whole world was tethered to her immediate geography and her immediate circle of people. She was not the kind of girl who could simply disappear and start a new life somewhere. Her survival was completely intertwined with the small radius of her own neighborhood. Now, on the night of September 13th, 2010, Barbara had to leave for a night shift at a local tool manufacturing plant. And here's the detail that will matter in about 90 seconds. Because mother and daughter shared one cell phone, and because Barbara was the one going out into the world, Barbara took the cell phone with her to work that night. Samantha would be home with her younger brother, Hunter. If anybody wanted to reach Samantha, the only way to do it was through the apartment's landline, the wired phone sitting on the table. So we have a 19-year-old girl in pajamas, watching late-night TV with her little brother in a quiet apartment in a sleepy historic town with no way to communicate with the outside world except through one specific phone line. Just before midnight, that landline rings. Samantha picks up. She speaks. We don't know what was said, but we know that shortly after the call ended, Samantha turned to Hunter, her younger brother still up watching TV, and told him she was slipping out for a little bit. She told him not to worry. She told him she would be right back in the morning. She got up. She walked to her bedroom. She took off her pajamas and folded them neatly onto her bed. She put on whatever she put on. And then, taking nothing with her except the physical key to the apartment door, she stepped out into the pitch-black quiet of an Orange, Virginia midnight and shut the door behind her. She was never seen again. At 7 the next morning, Barbara got home from her shift at the plant. The apartment was quiet. Hunter was asleep. And Samantha was not there. The folded pajamas were sitting on the bed. The makeup was untouched. Every personal belonging she owned was right where it had been the day before. She had walked out of her life carrying nothing but a key. When police started digging into what had happened that night, they didn't have a lot to work with. There were no signs of a struggle inside the apartment. No witnesses had seen her on the road. No vehicles had been heard pulling up. But there was one thread they could absolutely pull on. The landline. The phone calls into the apartment that night were all on record with the phone company, so police pulled the records. And one name lit up the entire investigation like a flare. The midnight caller had been a man named Randy Allen Taylor, a local, a man who was very nearly 30 years older than Samantha, a man with a long, ugly criminal history, including convictions for arson and statutory burglary, A man with no innocent reason to be calling a teenage girl at midnight. Taylor, when investigators sat him down with Detective Evans Okerson, admitted he had called Samantha that night. In fact, he admitted he had called her up to 5 times, 5 calls, to a 19-year-old girl, late at night, from a man pushing 50 years old with a violent rap sheet. His alibi was the kind of thing that makes a detective's stomach turn. He claimed he had been calling Samantha in a protective capacity. He said he was trying to warn her to stay away from other young men with criminal records, guys she had supposedly met at a bar days earlier. And he bizarrely added that during the final phone call, he heard another man's voice in the background of Samantha's apartment before she allegedly hung up on him. A neat little detail designed to push the investigation toward a phantom third party. Now, this is where we have to start tearing into the logic of everything Randy Taylor was saying. Let's start with the promise to her brother. A 19-year-old girl talking to her 12-year-old little brother just before walking out the door at midnight specifically tells him she'll be right back in the morning. Hold on. Let's apply common sense. If you are a young woman who is planning to run away from your life and disappear forever, you do not stop and look your little brother in the face and promise him you'll be home for breakfast. That promise is not the act of a runaway. That promise is the act of a young woman who thinks she is going to be back in a few hours. She didn't know she was walking into something permanent. She thought it was a quick errand. Whatever Randy Taylor said to her on the phone, he convinced her that this was a fast in and out, not a goodbye. Now let's look at what she took with her. The answer is essentially nothing. No phone. There was no extra phone to take because the family's only one was with her mom at the plant. No car. She didn't have one. No ID, no money, no bag, no shoes for hiking, no clothes for traveling, nothing but the key to her own front door so she could let herself back in. Apply the basic test we've used in every case in this series. People who run away to start a new life don't leave with the apartment key in their pocket and absolutely nothing else. People who run away pack. People who run away grab money. People who run away say goodbye to siblings, not "see you at breakfast." Samantha was not running away. She was going somewhere quickly, fully expecting to come home because the person on the other end of that landline had told her something that made it feel small and safe. And then there is Randy Taylor's behavior. Let's look at his version of the night. He admits to making multiple late-night calls to a teenage girl. He admits she walked out of her house in the immediate aftermath of those calls. He then expects police to believe that between her front door and his front door, she just evaporated into the air. The math doesn't work. Predators use the cover of late nights and isolated darkness to bring victims to themselves. The calls aren't unrelated to her disappearance. The calls are the disappearance. There was also the matter of how she vanished without a physical trace. Orange is a small town. Late at night, the streets are dead quiet. Any car pulling up to an apartment, any door slamming, any voice raised, any scuffle in the parking lot, somebody would have heard. No one did. There was no dropped key in the parking lot, no blood, no torn fabric, no screams. That tells you something specific. Samantha didn't put up a fight in front of her own apartment. She walked out, met somebody, and got into a waiting vehicle. Whatever happened to her happened somewhere else, miles away in the dark. The town of Orange Police Department was so deeply suspicious of Randy Taylor and his grooming-style alibi that they actually placed a covert GPS tracker on his vehicle, hoping he would lead them right to Samantha. He never did. Either he was too smart to revisit the location, or whatever he did with her was already complete. And for a while, that's where the case sat. A missing girl. A suspect they couldn't crack. A predator with a story too clean to bust and too dirty to believe. And the town of Orange held its breath. Then came August of 2013. In Livingston, Virginia, just down the road from Orange, a 17-year-old girl named Alexis Murphy stopped at a gas station to fill up her car. She never made it home. Investigators, working with terrifying speed this time, pulled the gas station's CCTV footage. They watched their suspect walk right up to Alexis. They watched her interact with him. They watched him follow her out into the lot. The suspect on the tape was Randy Allen Taylor. He was arrested. He was tried. He was convicted for the abduction and murder of Alexis Murphy and sentenced to 2 life sentences. Inside his camper, Investigators recovered a bloody hair extension and a false eyelash, confirming his pattern of luring young women into isolated spaces where there were no witnesses, no security cameras, and no one to hear them call for help. The community looked at the Alexis Murphy case and felt the floor drop out. Orange Police Chief James Fenwick said it best: once Taylor was exposed as a predator, the two cases became inextricably combined. Samantha Clark had been the warm-up. Alexis Murphy was the second known victim, and on January 15, 2021, the Orange Police Department formally reclassified Samantha's case from a missing person investigation to an active abduction and homicide investigation, citing advances in forensic and investigative technology. Massive search efforts followed. A 200-acre private hunting club in the Ehart area, a place Taylor was known to frequent, was scoured by joint task forces. Cadaver dogs walked the ridges, volunteers walked the gullies. To this day, Samantha Clark's body has never been recovered. Randy Taylor remains the sole primary suspect in her death. He is sitting in a Virginia prison cell right now, serving life sentences for what he did to Alexis. He has never been formally charged with anything regarding Samantha. He has never told anyone where she is. He has had over a decade to come clean, and a decade of complete, calculated silence. She promised her little brother she would be home by breakfast. She folded her pajamas on her bed and walked out the door into the soft, small-town darkness of an Orange, Virginia midnight. Whatever the man on the phone said to get her out of that apartment, it must have sounded so simple, so safe. And it was the last conversation Samantha Clark ever had.